My name is Cole Harrison. I'm Executive Director of Massachusetts Peace Action, one of the three groups that organized the conference today. And thank you for coming together. And I also want to welcome those in the overflow room and those who are watching the live stream around the country and around the world. Thank you for joining us. We come together at a difficult time in history, as I'm sure everyone here knows. We took a defeat on November 8th, a very serious one, but we win battles, we lose battles, and when an army loses a battle, what does it do? It comes together and it figures out its strategy and it figures out the way forward. That's what we're gathered here today to do. We have many elements of strength. We should not despair. We have no basis to despair or give up. We need to regroup and move forward. And you know, after the Great Recession of 2008, we have had a tremendous upsurge in the people's movements in this country. We've had Occupy Wall Street. We've had the Fight for 15. We've had the climate justice movement that has penetrated into practically every corner of this country and the world. We've had students agitating about Palestine and for equal rights for Palestinians. We've had Black Lives Matter. And we've had the Bernie Sanders campaign. Bernie Sanders won 13 million votes and almost won the Democratic nomination, starting from a standing start less than 2 years before. So we have tremendous potential to regroup those forces, build them ever stronger, and win out. A brief overview to our day. We have, in a minute I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Bob Wing. He's going to orient us to how the election arena fits in with building social movements, and we're going to have some time for discussion about that. We're then going to break and come up with an issues panel. Our issues panel brings forward 5 Boston area organizers, each coming from a different organizers, leaders coming from a different part of the social movements who are going to talk about what their movement is doing and how they can begin to work together all the more so. And then then we'll have a workshop session where we have a variety of subjects, including those 5 or 6 speakers, including Bob, as well as the 5 in the issues panel. Each will do a workshop for those who wanted to follow up on one of the speaker's remarks, as well as we have some workshops on additional topics too. Then we'll have lunch downstairs where you registered, and there's also a level below that floor where lunch will also be served. And then we'll come back here at 2 p.m. and we'll have our movement intersections panel. And we hear from 3 Boston organizers who represent national efforts to link the movements and create a unified progressive agenda. And we'll hear from them and talk about that. And then we'll have our last round of workshops and a closing reception. We can't solve all the issues in one day, but we're going to raise as many issues as we can. We're going to exchange as many ideas as we can. We're going to make connections and set the basis for ever stronger organizing going forward. I'm going to mention now that we'll call a follow-up meeting to this conference on January 12th in the evening. We haven't got the venue yet. It will be in Boston or Cambridge, where we're going to ask as many of you as can to come together again and discuss more practical steps to how to organize off of today's discussion. Let's see. Okay, you all found the Paresky Center, so I'm not going to say too much about how to get around the building. There are bathrooms right outside the Paresky Center, as well as there's some on the ground floor near the overflow room. The Mass Peace Action student groups called a protest of President-elect Trump's 3 most extreme appointments, Bannon, Flynn, and Sessions. Actually, he's appointed a lot more extreme appointments since then, but we started with the first 3. But we had postponed that protest. It was to have happened yesterday, but it's now been rescheduled, and it will happen next Friday, 4 p.m. at the State House. And I want to apologize for a couple people that showed up, didn't get the word that it was postponed, and showed up yesterday. But that protest will go on, but it will be next Friday the 9th at 4 p.m. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce, one more thing. Please silence your phones. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Bob Wing. I've known Bob for, I believe, about 36 years. He has worked on a variety of projects over his life as an organizer and activist and intellectual. A couple things that he did is co-founded Color Lines magazine, which is now a web magazine that addresses racial justice issues, and was way out there in racial justice thought process long before, early 2000s roughly, or early to mid 2000s in the Bush era. And then he went on to organize War Times magazine, which was a free publication that was passed out during the height of the Iraq War to orient the peace movement and peace and justice movement towards the challenges. And now he's been looking at electoral strategy, and he's working on a project called Organizing Upgrade, which tries to train movement groups to understand how they can take advantage of electoral tactics and fit them in with social justice, with movement building. So with that, I'm going to introduce Bob Wing.
Well, good morning. Haven't been in Boston for a while, and it's nice to be here. I gathered, when I was asked to speak, I was told there were going to be 200 or 300 people here. And then when I got here, they said 600. And I thought, well, boy, I didn't realize I was so famous in Boston. Somehow I don't think it had much to do with me.
We're not supposed to admit to Simmons that there are 600 people, so.
Oh, okay. Never mind. So the first thing I want to do is just everybody who came here, let's just stand up and give ourselves a round of applause. Is Boston ready to fight? Yes, Boston is ready to fight. I also see that there's a number of people here, like me, who've been in the struggle since at least the 60s. And I want to particularly recognize and honor all of you. We have gone through a lot. History kind of played a trick on us. As young people, we came up with a tremendous hope and enthusiasm and power, the idea that we could transform society and indeed transform the world. And here we are in our 60s, and we're fighting neo-fascism. What happened? A topic for another discussion. What I'm going to do today is something that is not particularly normal in a group of this size. Normally in a group of this size, when you include the overflow, you kind of give a rousing, inspirational speech. And that's not what this is going to be. This is going to be a kind of nuts and bolts speech about strategy, about what we can do from here. It's going to be kind of wonky, but I think it's probably the best thing that I have to contribute at this moment. I think we all are pretty aware of the dangers in the situation. I'm just going to spend a moment on that and go directly to sharing some opinions about the strategy to fight Trump. That hopefully my purpose isn't to give answers, my purpose is to open up a discussion that we'll be having for years and hopefully will be based on our work, okay? So that's what I'm going to try to do in this presentation. Is this thing working? Where is it? You can see it? Yeah, I'm looking for a screen. Okay, they can catch up, so don't worry. So just a moment, though, on that, really the historic nature of the danger of Trump and Trumpism. I mean, we have now a racist and openly, nakedly racist, misogynist, authoritarian in power. The most important dynamic of the election the dynamic that really characterized the whole election. There were many, but the overwhelming one was that the far right, already powerful, moved several steps further to the right than the Tea Party, for example, in 2010. And in moving so far to the right, so openly racist and misogynist, even authoritarian, even inviting Russia to spy on us, we would have hoped that that would have split the far right. It would have split the Republican Party. But as a matter of fact, the opposite happened. He was able to bring pretty much the entire Republican coalition with him.
It's showing your slide. So
Oh, well.
so keep going. We'll try to fix
Yeah, all right. So for the first time in U.S. history, it's the first time in U.S. history that a populist insurgency has ever taken over a political party, one of the main political parties, let alone to win the presidency. So, I mean, Donald Trump is not the most reactionary president we've ever had, obviously, but he's the most reactionary president we've had for many, many decades. He is the greatest threat to turning back gains that we have made over the centuries and over the decades of any president ever elected in the United States. The right now controls all branches of the federal government. They control 32 governorships. That's 64% of the governorships of this country. Both houses of the state government in 32 states, and the vast majority of the territory of the United States. There is a map of the county by county results of the last election. Okay? You all live in Boston. I spent many years in the Bay Area. We live in the bluest of the blue areas. We forget there's a rest of the country out there. The rest of the country, as a matter of fact, starts 20 miles from here when you get into the more rural areas. And this is what the country looks like. Okay? This has happened over the last 20 or 30 years. It was not always this way. The countryside, the rural areas, were a powerful support for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But things have changed in a way. You know the old slogan that Mao had about surround the cities from the countryside? Well, guess what? We have been surrounded from the countryside. We have a lot of work to do. So we suffered a devastating loss, but as Cole said, we can win. Let us not forget that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 2.5 million votes. Al Gore won by 540,000 votes. Hillary Clinton won by 2.5 million votes, yet our system, the Electoral College system, which I just wrote an article about, I'm not going to go through it here, which is a system that is thoroughly undemocratic and thoroughly racist, which erases virtually half of the black vote, which weights small states literally 3 times as much as big states. That system that actually originated in slavery and for the slaveholders is the system that has thrown the election in 2000, and again, this election, to a person who lost by 2.5 million votes. So we have also seen the rise of what's often called the rising American electorate. This rising American electorate, peoples of color, unmarried women, LGBTs, young voters, working people, is by far the majority of the population and increasingly progressive. It is an inexorable political and demographic growth. Each presidential election, the people of color vote is 2% greater than the previous one, just by itself, not counting the other pieces. We also this year had a huge growth of the progressive movement, not only in the movements that Cole mentioned, the Fight for 15, Black Lives Matter, etc., but of course in the Bernie campaign. I think there is no question at this point, if you look at the Democratic primary, that the vast majority, or certainly the majority, of the people who vote Democratic are far to the left of Hillary Clinton. These are resources that we have to draw on. They're large resources. We are going to take hits. There's going to be massive voter suppression in the next few years. But we have a majority. We have to activate that majority, and we have to build on that majority. We have to do both. We have a core to build on, and then to expand from. So now I'm going to go more directly into the discussion of strategy. To me, the starting point of strategy is identifying our goals, our strategic goals. From there, if you can identify your goals, you can try to build a strategy to achieve those goals, okay? So the first subject here is the goals. So basically and it's not just me, I've been working with a lot of people on this over time here, and there's a long way to go, but don't act like this is an individual product. Basically proposing 3 major goals for this next period. The first and most important is to dump Trump in 2020. The second is to defend our communities from attacks. And the third is to advance and build progressive power. Now, these goals are interlinked. They're not separate. The lead goal is to dump Trump in 2020, because if we don't dump Trump in 2020, no matter how much we try to defend our communities, no matter how much we build progressive power, we'll be thrown backwards. We will be thrown backwards. 4 years of Trump is horrible. 8 years of Trump would be a historic disaster. Okay? On the other hand, if we don't defend our communities and build our motion and our power in defending our communities, not only people of color communities and LGBT communities, but working people and our issues, the environment and women, if we don't do that, we will never defeat Trump in 2020. If we don't advance and build progressive power through those movements and through offensive movements, through campaigns, through local and state campaigns especially, but also federal ones. If we don't build our progressive power, if we don't build out the progressive infrastructure, we cannot beat Trump in 2020. So these goals are interconnected. They have to be taken and worked with state by state. The situation in different states is different. In a place like California, where I am now from, I just spent 5 years in North Carolina, but now I'm back in California, kind of for good reason. I'm adopting my goddaughter, but I was very unhappy to leave North Carolina, where there's a tremendous fight back going on. I mean, from North Carolina, where the far right controls the government, compared to California, which is probably the only state in the country that has both the political will, it now has a Democratic 2/3 majority in both houses, plus money to do something progressive. Every state is different. Every locality is different. If you looked back at that map, you saw that the blue areas are surrounded by red areas. So even within states, everybody is going to have to figure out how to try to implement a strategy. And we're proposing this as overarching goals that then can be worked with by not only in localities and states, but also by every organization. Every organization needs a strategy, okay? We can't just move along. No more vanity projects, no more doing things just for ourselves. Things suddenly got extremely serious. So this is what we're proposing for or at least what I'm proposing at this point, for the first 3, for the goals for 2020. And beyond this, of course, we may defeat Trump. I think we can actually defeat Trump in 2020. We will not defeat Trumpism by 2020. I'm going to say it again. They control 32 states, okay? Numerous localities, and both houses of the Congress and the Supreme Court. It's going to take more than 2020. It's really, literally, probably the next 2 to 3 decades of fight that it's going to take to root them out and for us to grow into power, okay? Just one last thing on the progressive power. One of the things we learned in this election is that the Democratic elite cannot lead successfully the fight against the right. So the need to build progressive power is... The need to build progressive power is not just a vanity project. It is a project that is absolutely crucial to defeating the right, okay? So we will have to learn how to do a unity and struggle relationship with the broad Democratic Party and beyond. We need everybody. Just think, we need everybody. But without our growing our power, this is not going to work. Okay, so that was the first piece, what we propose as 3 strategic goals. Then, this going to just propose a few things about what might be the strategy to achieve these goals. Again, very broad ideas. So the first one is that we need the broadest possible unity against the far right. Now, I just said, and I really do believe, that unless progressive power is grown significantly, unless we, in particular, have somebody at the top of the ticket, possibly from this state, in 2020, who can enunciate a clearly progressive program across issues and sectors, can appeal to working people and to the base of people of color, we cannot win. On the other hand, let me just say, in my opinion, we need everybody. Now, let's just think about the Democratic elite, okay? Who do you think funds most movements? With the exception of the trade unions, a lot of that money for nonprofits, et cetera, comes from people who are part of the Democratic elite. George Soros, by the way, you know, many, many others. Also, many current electeds come out of the Democratic center, if not representative directly of the Democratic elite. We need them to fight Trump. We need them to fight Trump, okay? On the other, so there are some people who think we can just take over the Democratic Party tomorrow. It's not that simple. It took 50 years for the far right to take over the Republican Party. And you see, even as Trump won, he's reaching back to try to pull the Mitt Romneys back in, because guess what? He also needs them, all right? We need to build progressive power, but we need everybody everybody has a role in defeating Trump. I'll just name one other important element of the Democratic elite. The press. The press. The press is basically owned by the Democratic elite. Can we win without the press? I don't think so, okay? We have our own press, but, you know, actually Trump won without the press, though the press helped him tremendously. Right. He only got 4 endorsements from newspapers in the whole country, 4 significant endorsements. Nonetheless, everybody wanted to sell newspapers, and they promoted him, which was tragic. It was tragic. Let us hope and let us fight to make sure the press doesn't do that again. If they do it again, it's going to be very, very difficult. So that's the first. We need the broadest anti-right front possible. It's going to be complicated. In many states, we mainly fight the Democratic elite. That's who mainly runs the cities. That's who mainly runs the governorships, et cetera, in the blue states, okay? So often we're in combat with them over our issues. We have to be able to pivot back and forth to when we fight them in primaries on issues and when we unite against the Republicans. We have to become more sophisticated. The Republican far right learned how to do that over 50 years. They did the same thing. They fought the Republicans in the red states. They fought them in the primaries. They united against the Democrats in the general elections. Okay? They fought them on issues, and then finally they took it over. This was the takeover happened just this year after 50 years. We need to learn how to do that. But we can only do it successfully if we build our own power. If we don't have power on our own, the Democratic elite will continue to sideline us. The second one is an inside-outside strategy on electoral politics in the Democratic Party. The left and the progressive movements have been largely focused on what we call outside work. In other words, building around issues, building in communities, organizing, without a whole lot of focus on the electoral process or the Democratic Party, okay? We have to build up the inside game as well, and we have to connect the two. Again, the far right did this quite beautifully. More often than not, when we are fighting campaigns, we don't really take into account politics. We have to take into account politics much more. And we have to build the inside apparatus as well as the outside. Now, we've come a long way since 2000. We have groups now who are inside-outside groups who have power on the inside processes of the Democratic Party. Not only your Bernie Sanderses and that movement, but groups like Move On reach millions of people. Okay? This year, a group called Color of Change, which is kind of modeled after Move On, got to the point where it could reach millions. So we've come a long way, but we have so much further to go. We have the beginnings of an apparatus, of an infrastructure that can fight inside the Democratic Party, but it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. Many of you here, you need to be candidates. Okay? We have to not shy away from governing. We have to have a governance attitude. We can't just be outside agitators. We have to fight for power. We have to be ready to take power. And we do that through an inside and outside strategy. The second piece is that we should grow and strengthen off of the Obama coalition. This is what I earlier called the rising American electorate. Okay, there's voices out there that have really overestimated the loss we took, as if suddenly the rising American electorate wasn't much of anything, and that we need to go run to the white workers. Well, of course we need white workers. We need everybody. But we have a massive, already existent coalition that needs to be mobilized. I read an article just last night. I need to read it more thoroughly. But you know, one of the main kind of media drumbeats about the election is we got beat because white working people, especially in the Rust states, went over to the Republicans. Well, actually, according to this article, Trump gained about 300,000 votes from working people. I'm talking low and middle income people in the Rust states. But Clinton lost 1 million. Okay, either they didn't vote or they voted third party. Okay, she was unable to mobilize the core Democratic constituencies. Okay, we need to build that core. Every part of the Democratic constituency showed up in smaller numbers or smaller numbers than expected and voted for her in smaller percentages than voted for Obama. We need to rebuild that coalition. And off of that coalition, we need to expand. There's no way that we can cede that much of the country to the Republicans. We cannot do that. We need to win people, whether it's on the environment, whether it's through unions and working class issues, through issues of reproductive rights or LGBT. And at the same time, we need to get everybody to the point where they understand that, so they will not be manipulated by the racist version of that. And that's not a short-term task.
5 minutes.
So let's build our main coalition, and from our coalition, every part of it has to build out and reach out farther than they have in the past. So those are some of the main elements of strategy, and I want to address now something that, for the lack of a better term, I'm going to call orientation. We need strategic goals, we need a strategy to achieve those goals, and we need a new strategic orientation to implement the strategy. And here's some of the elements I want to talk about on this strategic orientation. First, we've had a bad habit of reducing politics to hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands instead of realizing that politics is in the tens of millions. How many demonstrations have you been to of 50 people or 5,000 people where people get together and they say the people united will never be defeated? This is a bad joke. We should not allow it. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have small groups. Small groups, we hope for them to be big, but if they're small, sometimes we build from small. But let's not fool ourselves. Let's not fool others into thinking that the people united will never be defeated when you have 5,000 or even 50,000. Politics is in the tens of millions. 120 million people vote for president. Unless we can reach millions and tens of millions, it's a vanity project. Okay? So that's the first thing. We need to get out of the blue strongholds. When you organize, think about the areas beyond Boston. When you're here, adopt an area for the 2018 and 2020 elections that you're going to help work, that are purple, that are battleground areas in battleground states near you. Let's think politically and get out of our strongholds and not be self-satisfied. We cannot be self-satisfied. The second piece on orientation is we have to cut issues for the majority and for the country as a whole. We've gotten into the habit of cutting issues for the most directly affected, which is important because the most directly affected are often the motor force of building a motion, of building a movement. But we need to represent our issues as issues that are crucial to the country as a whole, because they are crucial to the country as a whole. About the only movement that talks about it that way is the environmental movement in a consistent way. It's not just about those who are denied abortions. It's not just about those who get shot on the streets by the police. It's about our democracy. It's about our morality. It's about our country, and we have to cut issues that way. This was the signal contribution of Dr. King in the 60s. He took an issue that could have very easily just been black against white, and he made it the moral issue and the issue of democracy for the whole country. We have some examples today. The National Domestic Workers Alliance, which organizes domestic workers, largely immigrant women. They cut their issue, they focus, they center immigrant women, domestic workers, but they have a big campaign called Caring Across Generations, that instead of pitting the immigrant women against the people they take care of, who are often just middle class or working class people themselves, they say, look, the whole country has an issue of senior care, and we need to invest in senior care for everybody, for those who are taken care of as well as the caretakers. We need to cut our issues big. We have to represent the country. We have to understand, because it is true, that the future of the country is at stake, not just the future of those who immediately get impacted in a negative way. The third thing is that we need to get strategic with each other. No more just let's meet each other every 6 months and for a hot second at a demonstration. Organizations have to unite, people have to unite. We have to discuss and try to come to unity or agree to disagree and yet have common action over the big issues for the whole coming period. No more just being tactical with each other. No more being strangers. We've got to get to know each other and build trust. You build trust in politics by discussing the big issues in a strategic way, even if you disagree, because we are all allowed to change our minds. In this next period is going to be, it's new terrain, it's a new situation. None of us has been in it before. We're going to change our minds, we're going to make a lot of mistakes, but we have to have the right to take risks and to make mistakes and to sum it up, and to not every time somebody makes a mistake to write them off. We cannot do that. We do that, we are dead. So unite, but unite by being strategic together, by organizations being more strategic together, by leaders being more strategic together, by everybody, when you meet and to get to know each other and really discuss the big issues of our day together. So those are a few ideas that I want to put forward for the future. And of course, what I have on this slide up here could have been the subject of six conversations, but I'm going to end on it anyway. The fight we're in is a fight over the future, literally, of the world. The polarization, the political polarization in the United States, is a result of the crisis of corporate globalization, a project that's been in place since Reagan and Maggie Thatcher. That project, which served the elite extremely well, which brought tremendous wealth to the elite and not to us, which brought wars all over, especially failed wars and terrorism, massive migration, changed racial demography. These are issues being fought out all over the world. Probably a number of you are aware that there's probably something like, I think there's, on last count, something like 15 countries in Europe where the openly fascist party is either the number one or number two party. This is a fight of global dimension. It's a fight over the future of the globe. People in the environmental movement say that all the time, but now it's time for all of us to understand the dimensions of this struggle. So Trumpism or a progressive future, the center will not hold. Corporate globalization is not going to just go merrily along. We're either going to move strongly to the left, we're going to move strongly to the right. Temporarily, we have moved strongly to the right. Our fight now is to move it back. Our fight now for some time to come is to move it back. And it brought me back, Fidel just died. And it brought me back to an old slogan that Cuba used to promote. It's the last thing there in Spanish. El presente es de lucha, el futuro es nuestro. The present is struggle, the future is ours. Thank you.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes for some questions. Paul's going to set up 2 mics in the 2 corridors, and people should line up. I would like you to please keep your question to 1 minute so that we can get through as many as possible.
Could we also take, say, 3 at a time? And we can get more questions in that way, and I'll try to respond. By the way, most of what I just presented will be coming out in a post-election politics discussion guide. It should be out by Monday. It will probably appear on a number of websites, including organizingupgrade.org. It'll be a much more lengthy version.
Hi, how you doing? Yeah, I'm Julius. I'm a presenter today, so I'm excited to be able to kick off the questions. I have to say that I really appreciated the experience and the grace of your talk. I also had some problems with it. I felt as if the whole talk was given in the voice of us versus like the people that we have to go get, particularly black and immigrant and the rising electorate. It felt as if we were speaking as if they weren't in the room. And they're largely not, but I felt as if, just me personally, I felt as if I wasn't in the room in the talk. And I think that upholds white supremacy in the process. So I'd like you to speak to that. And I also think war is a toxic analogy.
Which, I'm sorry?
War, fighting and army and brigades, and we can't outkill Trump. And then I think intersectionality is crucial, perhaps more so than you uplifted in creating political solidarity. And I think that any movement that doesn't center the most marginalized people actually not only misses its mark, but is going to be ineffective. And I think that was reflected in the 3 main goals that you had. The first one was defeat Trump. The second one was defend communities. And I think that's from somebody who lives outside of those endangered communities. So I'd like you to speak to those.
Yeah. Well, actually, since those were pretty sharp questions, I'm going to, instead of taking 3, are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So here we go. And we're going to have these discussions. So some of you may have just gotten a little bit uncomfortable there. Please, we better learn how to be comfortable with differences, okay? We are going to have differences. We have differences. So, first of all, let me just tell you, I live in South Central LA. I work in South Central LA. I've lived in black communities my entire life, so if my voice came off that way, I'm sorry. I'm not going to say it didn't. It may have. But don't get wrong about who I am. Second, yeah, war is not a great analogy. I didn't even know that I slipped into that analogy. And yeah, I'm with you on that.
I think I did also.
It is a bad analogy. I'm totally with you on that piece. It's a bad habit from the past, I think, and one of the ones that we will have to overcome. We're absolutely not going to outkill Trump, and any attempt to do so will only get us into worse problems than we're in now. So I totally agree with that. Intersectionality. I did have it in the piece. I kind of somehow skipped over it as I was speeding up at the end. So this is a big subject, and it goes together with centering the most marginalized. I'll put them together. And this is, I think, one of the most complicated conversations we're going to have over the next few years. I also come from the history, when I was a young person, I grew up and I became political in 1968. I grew up as a radical who was extremely critical of Dr. Martin Luther King. Because I felt like he didn't center black people in the way that it seemed like he should, and was not critical enough of liberals as he should have been. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten a broader perspective on that. I also come out of community organizing, which has the habit of focusing on the most directly affected. And what I have come to think is that I've kind of come back full circle on these things. Absolutely, as I think I did mention in the talk, the most directly affected do have to be centered. They are often, more often than not, the motor force of any movement. They are the most directly affected. On the other hand, if we stay there, if that's as far as we go, at a certain point, I remember I was in a conversation, must have been 40 years ago, where somebody said, if that's the way, if we think that it's a race to be the most oppressed, then suddenly the most oppressed and the most revolutionary are transgendered women who have AIDS and are lepers and of color. So it's, on one hand, I am in total agreement that the most directly affected folks have to be at the center. If we don't get a big movement of people of color, we are sunk. Let me just say it straightforward. We are sunk if we don't get a huge movement of people of color. They are not only the most directly affected, they are the core of the progressive people in this country. They're the group that votes 70% progressive. Without them, we are absolutely sunk. But if we stay there, and if not only that, if we divide people of color up, immigrants, non-immigrants, people born in the United States, not born in the United States, people who are more or less poor. All of these are real divisions. They work out in the real dynamics of every community. They're very real. They're not just made up by the far right, okay? These are very, very real dynamics. But if we allow ourselves to be divided up along these lines, we are going to lose. We are going to lose. So what I'm calling for here, and maybe I wasn't as clear as I had wanted to be, on the other hand, we may well have a real difference here, is that yes, we must center the most directly affected. Intersectionality is also absolutely crucial. But intersectionality has also been used more recently to divide ourselves up rather than to actually unite us. Intersectionality is absolutely crucial. But if it's used primarily to segment us, to say that this group is important and that group isn't important, that this group is more important than that group, without the unity, intersectionality should be a call to unity, not a call to division. So I'm all for it. I'm just saying that I think it gets used in different ways. I'm all for centering the most directly affected. I'm just saying it gets used in different ways. And I'm calling for us to do those things, to center those issues, to center the most directly affected, but to build the broadest front possible.
Okay, over here.
I'm so sorry. I just can't. I'm sorry. So I particularly want to encourage you to engage in paradigm intersectionality, as particularly advanced by Ange-Marie Hancock, because I think it directly contradicts your synopsis of intersectionality. And then I think that your response encapsulated what I found to be problematic, because even in talking about we, there was still the othering of the they. It was there throughout the whole thing. I was paying attention. I was waiting for it, and what I'm hoping.
Would you say that again? I'm sorry. Would you say that last part?
You
again?
said that we need to win, and we need to not be divided by all these divisions, right? But then when you're referring to black and brown people, you refer to me as they. Like the person that you're talking to, you refer to as they. And what I'm saying is that there is a progressive erasure of blackness and brownness, and a significant tokenization of marginalization just to win. And that's the central problem in the point of this conversation, right? And I've been part of the conversations about what this conference is about. The point of the conversation is how can we unite movements, right? It starts with our language. It starts with our tone, and you were called in to set the tone, and I'm challenging you on it because I think it's really important to not unintentionally other people who are in the room. Thanks for listening.
Okay, thanks. Let's hear from over here.
Yeah, I'm a nuclear weapons activist from the state of New Hampshire. I was really troubled by your use of the term vanity movement, vanity issue, and also you're connecting it to sort of a belittling of smaller groups. Maybe I didn't completely understand your meaning, maybe you can clarify, but I do want to say this, that many of us as activists cannot be involved unless we can feel like a meaningful part of a locally based group. And the other thing I want to say really loudly about that is, of course, locally based groups need to be part and coordinated with national campaigns, national actions. But we cannot have a situation where national groups try to pass down cookie-cutter organizing plans to local groups. You have to listen to us, and you have to be guided by what you're hearing from local groups as well as national perspectives.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Pat.
I wanted to make sure we leave here with a strong focus on 2018. I think that if we cannot do something about 2018, we're really at a deficit for doing anything in 2020. So that's one point I'd like to make. And the other one is about rurality. I'd just like to make a plug for Western Mass, which voted strongly on every progressive issue on the last ballot. So we can build unity with our rural communities. They're suffering mightily from job loss and problems of old polluted riverways, and every one of the key movements in this country is represented in troubles in rural communities. So we've got to build that bridge also.
Thanks, and one more over here.
Hi, I wanted to ask what you meant by adopting a purple state. Would that, in order to help make the world more progressive, does that mean you'd have to move to a purple state, or just give it support while still in a blue state?
Guardianship. No. I just become the guardian of an 8-year-old. I'm sorry, you were done?
No, I'm just wondering what that actually means by
Yeah.
adopting a purple
Gotcha.
state
All right.
and getting out of the far left strongholds.
Want to
Thank
take
you.
those?
Okay. All right, I want to thank you. People are going right to the point, and I like it. These are hard conversations, and I want to, the woman who spoke over there, talked about national and local. And again, I think this is a really crucial topic over which there's going to be a long series of conversations, I think that there's a point of view that has increasingly been adopted over the last 20 years, probably primarily as a result of the fact that since 1980 up until Obama, we didn't control the presidency. That moved us to state and local politics as focal point. Now, we've always done state and local politics. But, when I was young, and I think for those of you who were active in the 60s and 70s, and at least in the early part of the 80s, our eyes were always on the national as we did the local. And I think as we lost control, or lost the ability to impact upon national politics, we started to focus more on local and state politics. And there's a lot of good in that. There's certainly a lot of good in that. On the other hand, there's also some problems with it. I'm going to give you an example. In California, and I think this point of view is very strong in community organizing. I don't know about, community organizing is mainly where I come out of and what I mainly do. So I'm not as familiar with a lot of the other sectors and organizations. But there's a point of view that has gotten very strong that basically implies or says directly that politics flows from the bottom up, that it flows from the local to the state to the national. Or some people just put it as all politics are local. Well, there's some truth. On one level, all politics are local. You have to deal with people in the particular situation that you're in. No matter whether you're carrying an international agenda, you have to deal with people as they are. But I think this election is a good example of how politics, especially, tend to be primarily national. The dynamic around Trump didn't happen local by local. It happened unbelievably uniformly throughout the country. As soon as we saw the results from Florida, we saw it followed up in every state, in every single state. And so here's how it worked out. Here's the part that I find problematic. It's not problematic to have small groups. It's not problematic to have local groups. Certainly not. All groups, even if they call themselves international, are local groups, right? There's a conceit that if you hang up a shingle that says you're national or international, that you are. But here's where it gets problematic. I work in an organization in South Central Los Angeles, and we had over 100 people in the field for this election, full-time. We only worked on local and state propositions. We didn't say one word about the national election. There were over 1,000 people that we were in coalition with who did the same thing, And it's paralyzing to deal with issues that are national if you stay local and stay state. It's paralyzing. Then what can a blue state do in a national election? You can't, it's almost impossible to think about. So this is a complicated dynamic. I don't want to try to make it simple. There's always, every time there's a national conference or a statewide conference or a statewide action or a national action, there's always negotiation and conflict between the place where it's being held and the activists who are core in the place where it's held. And that's, in general, a healthy dynamic. It's something inevitable, and it's something healthy. But I guess what I'm advocating here is that we all have to keep our eyes on the national as well. And we have to figure out what we can contribute when and how we can be allied with or connected to the organizations that can most impact that. 2018, absolutely. If we don't gain momentum in 2018, we're dead in 2020. 2018 will not only be critical at the state level, because the state level elections, the outcome in 2018, will determine who controls redistricting in 2020. primary fights. I hope there are primary fights in the Democratic Party all over the place. I am hoping that progressives will run against mainstream centrist Democrats throughout the country. And I hope we will win more than our share. It will be a critical place for mobilizing our electorate and our progressive folks. Now, by the way, can I just ask you, did I use the word they anywhere? Or were you just implied? I did? Okay, thank you. I'll have to, okay. Third piece on adopting purple states. So what I think is, I'll give an example. I was in North Carolina. I worked with a group, I worked mainly with the Moral Monday movement in North Carolina. But I also worked with a local group called the Durham Political Alliance, Durham People's Alliance. And the Durham People's Alliance is primarily a Durham group. Now, if you know anything about North Carolina, you know Durham may be the bluest part of the entire South. It's a historically black city. The largest slave plantation in the whole state was in Durham. There was no Durham at the time, but the whole area covered by Durham was the largest slave plantation in the state. But what the Durham People's Alliance has done in the way they functioned in this election, because they not only had the presidential, they were a battleground state, but they also had a huge fight over the governorship, which hasn't ended yet. That outcome has not been determined. But also they had to break the supermajority in at least one house of the assembly in order to be able to, if they won the governorship, to be able to veto and then uphold a veto. Okay. They had a massive fight. So what the Durham Political Alliance, People's Alliance did, is they basically began organizing way ahead of time, not just in Durham, but in the surrounding battleground counties. Okay? And that's one of the kinds of things I'm talking about. And if it's out of state, building an alliance or alliances, organizations are almost all, in my organization in South Central LA, I tell them all the time, there are more paid professional organizers in the room during a staff meeting than there are in the entire state of North Carolina. Okay? So that's a fact. And if that's going to be the same, we're going to be consistently out-organized in the purple areas. So, in fact, some people, I'm not here to start a migrant movement, but honestly, we have to think about these things. And if we can't move, most of us won't be able to move. I was able to move for a while, and I moved exactly for that reason. We have to figure out how to get connected with groups and organizations and whatever in other places. So that's what I meant, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Bob will be giving a workshop at the 12 o'clock time when people can go deeper into his points. Now what I'd like you to do is turn to the person next to you. We're going to take 10 minutes, I guess really 8 minutes, and just process what we've discussed so far and exchange some thoughts about the day, after which we will go to a break at 10:30.